So, as we continue our travels through elections, campaigns, one of the most basic ways that politics influences us, and for that matter, we influence politics, we turn to the one election which is not like any other. The one election that doesn't belong. Sorry, I went Sesame Street on you there for a second. Which is the process of electing a president. When I say it's not like any of the others, it's because it is. Structurally, functionally, it is completely different. And it creates a very different type of campaign. So, first of all, let's talk about what the constitutional basis is for electing a president. It is, as so many things in the original Constitution were, not a direct election. Let's remember that the only direct election in the original Constitution was the House of Representatives. Supreme Court justices were and are appointed. Originally, United States senators were selected by their state legislatures. They were not directly elected until a little over a century ago, courtesy of the 17th Amendment. And then there's this. Article 2 of the Constitution lays out, Article 2, Section 1, lays out how we will elect the president. Each state shall appoint in any manner or such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. So, in 2022, which is when this was obviously typed, also true in 2024, there are 535 electors because we have 435 members of the House, and we have now for a century, and we have 100 senators. Now, the 23rd Amendment, passed or ratified in the 1960s, did add an additional 3 electoral votes for the District of Columbia. And so, in total, we have 538 electors. And of course, because it is created by the size of your congressional delegation, House plus Senate, it is to an extent, not fully, the math doesn't quite math, it is mostly proportional in that the larger, more populated states do get more electoral votes than those who do not. But because senators are allocated into the Electoral College, it is a bit skewed. For example, the population of California is like 70 times more, 75 times more than that of the state of Wyoming. And yet, Wyoming and California, the electoral vote count is 54-3, which is an 18-1 ratio. So you get the idea. Now, here is where the one of these ones is not like the others kicks in. Unlike elections for Congress or your state legislature or governor, it is not what we call a plurality election. Plurality elections is the most common form of elections, not just in the U.S., but in much of the world. In that to win an election, you have to get more votes than the other guy. Right? In theory, let's take a close race of the recent past. If you look at the U.S. Senate race in Nevada in 2022, you had Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat, get 48% of the vote, and you had Adam Laxalt, the Republican, get 47% of the vote, and then Libertarians and Green parties and none of the above, which is an option in Nevada, ate up the other 5%. Under our system, Catherine Cortez Masto wins. She had more votes than anybody else. She is duly elected as the U.S. Senator from Nevada until the year 2028. However, not true of the presidency. You have to win a majority, and not a majority of the popular vote. A majority of the electoral votes. Those 538 votes allocated to the states. So the 12th Amendment, which was passed to undo the mess that was created by the 1800 election. Feel free to go watch Hamilton again to get a vibe of that. 12th Amendment states that if no candidate gets a majority of the electoral votes, and here's the thing, that doesn't just mean that 3 candidates eat up the votes. It is possible, unlike, practically speaking, in the popular vote, with 538 electoral votes, it is actually possible, and there's a number of plausible scenarios where you can tie. So if that happens, then among the top 3 vote getters in the Electoral College, or 2 if it's a 269 to 269 tie, the House of Representatives, with each state getting 1 vote, determines the winner. Which could, again, in theory, tie, because there's 50 states, but as a practical matter, probably would not happen. So we've had 57 elections, 58 by the time you read this. I'm being current, but again, this is summer of 2024, so it's, for a lot of you guys listening to this, the election will have intervened between, so it'll be 58 by that point. The House has had to step in 3 times, all of them in the distant past. In 1800, because there was a quirk in the Constitution. The original Constitution had it, just for those who don't know and haven't seen Hamilton, the original Constitution had it that the winner of the most electoral votes, or the majority of electoral votes, would become president, and the person who came in second would become vice president. So, inadvertently, people of the Democratic Republican Party accidentally split their votes evenly, therefore tying the election between Jefferson and Burr. It had to go to the House. It was an absolute mess. Jefferson was eventually selected. By the way, one bit of sleight of hand by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Hamilton did not have a vote in the House of Representatives. He was not a member of Congress, but he did publicly, angry pug behind me, he did publicly say that he preferred Jefferson, and that may have swayed some folks, which led to the rivalry that led to the duel and, all that. You can go watch the musical if you want to see that. But then in 1824, you had the infamous corrupt bargain election. And then in 1876, you had an election that was so close in several states that were in the midst of transitioning their power and authority. This was the end of Reconstruction. A lot of the southern states had been quote-unquote redeemed. That is to say, their white former Confederate leaders had retaken their state governments, and they issued results very different than the ones that the Reconstruction governments of their states had issued, and there was legitimate dispute over who won the election. And it actually took a compromise between the two parties in Congress to determine the winner. Easily whatever you want to say about the corrupt bargain, whatever you want to say about how close the 2000 election was, easily the closest and most corrupted election in American history was 1876. So how does the Electoral College work? Well, apart from 2 states, those 2 states being Nebraska and Maine, who allocate their votes by congressional district, so it's possible for the states to split, the Electoral College is conducted on a winner-takes-all basis. Now, what does that mean? It means that if a candidate wins a state, even if it's by 1 vote, by 500 votes, by 5 million votes, it's all to 0 in the Electoral College. So, take 2000, because again, I do not have a crystal ball to look ahead to 2024, and you'll know that because in other videos being recorded around the same time, I refer to President Biden running for re-election, which as of today, he no longer is. In the year 2020, you have Joe Biden getting elected because he wins several states very narrowly. He wins Pennsylvania by about 80,000 votes. He wins Wisconsin by, I believe it was about 20,000 votes. He wins Georgia by like 12,000, 11,000, same for Arizona. And those states collectively put him over the top. So even though he won several states very closely, he wins all those states' electoral votes. It's not split proportionally in any meaningful way. So, unlike any other election, winning votes is irrelevant. It's winning states that matters. And that brings us to 2016, which was the last election to have this particular phenomenon that's happened about a half dozen times in American history, which is, in the presidential system, it is possible to not win the popular vote, but to win the electoral vote. Happened in 2016, talking about winning on a winner-take-all basis. Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania by like 20,000 votes. Wins, I believe it was Michigan by about 10,000 votes. Wins Wisconsin by a few thousand votes. Wins all these states really narrowly. And the net result is that he wins the Electoral College, even though Hillary Clinton, who had easily won some major states, easily won California, easily won New York, easily won Illinois, these big populated states that she won with a comfortable margin. Massachusetts, Maryland, I could go on. Because of that fact, Hillary Clinton wins almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump does, but Donald Trump wins the election because he won the Electoral College. He won the only thing in a presidential election that matters. So the goal is not to get more votes than your opponent. And the presidential election is the only election in America for which that's true. Okay? It's the only election in America where the goal is to win states, not to win individual votes. Which is why here's California, 40 million people, 39 point whatever, gets almost no attention during the presidential election because its outcome's pretty well assured. Kamala Harris, there aren't many polls yet of Harris versus Trump, but one has to assume because Kamala Harris is from California, she would do at least as good as Joe Biden did in the state, and Joe Biden had over a 20-point lead. So, at the end of the day, there's not really a whole lot of risk of Kamala Harris losing the state of California, so why spend the extensive amount of money to campaign there? Meanwhile, you've got considerably smaller states like Wisconsin that are going to be ground zero for the election because it is a state that has been won by less than 1 percentage point in the last 2 presidential elections. It is a state where the U.S. Senate race in 2022 was decided by 1 percentage point, where the governor's race was decided by, I believe it was 3. It is a very closely contested state. So Wisconsin, even though it is a fraction of the size of California, I think it's about 1/7 the size of California, and only has 10 electoral votes, it's going to get a ton of attention. Just like Pennsylvania, which is larger, I grant you. Just like Georgia, Arizona, Nevada that only has 6 electoral votes, but has been very close in most presidential elections, and whose governor and Senate races split. Republican one, Democrat won the other by a percentage point or 2. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, is the states that could swing electoral votes because they're closely contested get a lot more attention than the ones that are larger that aren't that contested. To give you an example going the other direction, Kamala Harris will probably not campaign that heavily, and not that this is a huge state, but it's a good-sized state, is not going to probably campaign that heavily in a state like Tennessee because she's going to lose it by a lot. She's probably not going to campaign in Indiana for the same reason. Might not, although I think she probably will, campaign in Texas because it's been since 1976 since a Democrat has won the state of Texas. Now, I think she probably will campaign in Texas only because the polls there, as we speak right now, are pretty close. Within mid to high single digits, 5, 6, 7, 8 points. Might make it tempting because Texas is so darn big. So, the act of running for president makes you campaign differently. It's called targeting, is the name that's often given to it. Because presidential candidates are conducted not as one contest of 100 and whatever million voters, but rather 51 discrete contests, the 50 states plus the District of Columbia, a smart presidential campaign understands you don't compete in every state. You don't campaign nationally. And you might say, well, why not? And the answer is because, realistically speaking, I could tell you right now, again, you guys have this information, and I don't probably, because you're probably watching this after the November elections. But I can tell you right now who's going to win 30 to 35 of the states, barring some historic thing that happens, some immense scandal that actually resonates with voters that falls Donald Trump or falls Kamala Harris, or Trump, resigns before November from his nomination for some reason. I can't imagine what that'd be. I don't actually think that's possible given, his desire to participate in these campaigns. But barring that, I can tell you who's going to win 30 states right now. I can tell you that the Democrat, whomever the Democrat's going to be, is going to win Hawaii, is going to win Illinois, is going to win Massachusetts, Maryland. And I can go on California. I can tell you for sure the Republican's going to win Tennessee and Kentucky. The Republican's going to win Oklahoma and Nebraska and South Dakota and North Dakota and Wyoming. there are very few states where I could say, sitting here today, I don't know who's going to win. Even some of the bigger states that will be contested, I can tell you who I think is likely to win. I think that Kamala Harris is or the Democrat. I better couch my terms after the last few weeks. I can tell you I'm pretty sure the Democrat will win Minnesota, but it's not a lock. I can tell you I'm pretty sure that the Republican will win Ohio, but it's not guaranteed. I can tell you I'm pretty sure that the Democrat will win New Mexico, and meanwhile the Republican will win Texas, but they're not guaranteed. So realistically speaking, a smart campaign understands early on, that, okay, there's states here that we're not going to lose. If we're losing, we're getting killed in a landslide anyway, because these are elections where our party has won the presidential election in whatever, take it 9 out of the last 10 elections or 11 of the last 12. We're not losing. And if we are, we're getting smoked anyway, so it doesn't matter. So you still don't campaign in that state. Because even if it's close, that means you're getting just housed everywhere else. Plus, at the same time, there's states that you're not going to win, no matter what effort you put in, right? The Democrats could put in millions and millions of dollars in West Virginia, and maybe they lose by 20 instead of 30. It's not worth the return on investment, right? Because as we mentioned earlier in this lecture, it's all or nothing. If you can't win a state, you have no right to their electoral votes. It does not make much sense to campaign in the state. So campaigns will target, usually going all the way down to about 12 or 16 states, to focus the vast majority of their attention on. I was lucky enough when I was in college, sorry, I had to turn to the Diet Dr. Pepper, throat got a little dry. I was lucky enough in college to see a seminar with one of the campaign leaders for Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign. And one of the things he noted is that they narrowed the entire presidential election down to 13 states at the time. They call them their play-heavy states. 13 states, they effectively ignored the other 37, figuring these are the ones we're going to win anyway, these are the ones we're going to lose anyway. And a couple of them's like, hey, they're close enough, but if we win them, great. They're not going to, shape the election. Places like Montana, which in that election was close, or Maine, which in that election was close. They had their 13 play-heavy states. They won 11 of the 13. The only ones they lost were North Carolina and Texas, because Texas in that election was actually a fairly close state. With that, they win the election. And they pick off a couple states they didn't expect to win, Nevada and Montana. And Bill Clinton gets elected president easily, 370 electoral votes. All campaigns do this. For as much as they talk about going to other states and expanding the map, the Republicans do this all the time. They talk about they're going to compete in New Mexico, but they don't put a lot of money in there because they know at the end of the day, even if they do win it, it's 5 electoral votes that if they're winning New Mexico, that means they're winning Arizona. That means they're winning easily in Texas. It means they're actually competitive in a state like Colorado. And those additional 5 electoral votes are for ego more than anything else because it's not going to matter to the outcome of the election. So targeting is something all presidential campaigns do. So what are the targeted states in this election before we get to the next thing and talk about what criteria people use? Again, this is July, but so far, what are the states getting the most attention? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan. Those are the top tier. Those are the top 5. Second tier, still very important, would be states like Nevada. Florida will still get some attention, even though it's kind of leaning Republican the last couple elections, because it's the 3rd largest state in the union. So yes, Florida will still get some attention. North Carolina will get a lot of attention, because that's a state that seems to be drifting slowly towards the Democrats. Likewise, Nevada will get attention because it's drifting slowly towards the Republicans. So it'll get some attention. Minnesota has started to become a state that's getting looked at a little bit more. I don't know how many states I mentioned there, but I don't think it's more than 12. And you could probably throw in there a state like Maine and New Hampshire get a little bit of attention because they're the swingier states of the New England area. if Republicans really feeling froggy, they might put some money into Oregon, because Oregon, while it is very left leaning because of the Willamette Valley, does have a pretty significant, very conservative contingent in the southern and eastern parts of the state. But at the end of the day, you're probably focusing on a dozen states. So how do you choose what to focus on? Well, let's talk about that. There's really three things. Past election performance is a big one. Look, if you're a Democrat, you know you've only lost Hawaii once since statehood. And that was in 1984. Okay, so that was 40 years ago. You're not going to lose it. Now, you may want to go there anyway, because who doesn't want to campaign on Waikiki? But you're not going to, because it's a lot of expense for no real gain, right? So past election performance matters. There are very few states that are really competitive election after election. There was a time when California was very competitive, but that day has been gone in California for 32 years. The last competitive election in the state of California was 1988. Last time the Republicans won it was 1984. So it's been a hot minute since a Republican at the presidential level has even been competitive in California. If you go back the last 4 elections, the margins have ranged from 25 to 32, I think it was, percentage points. So not just losing, but losing huge. So if you're a Republican, you're not going to target California. Now take a different state. Take a state like New York. New York, Democrats routinely won by 25, 30 points, 20 at the least. But in 2022, the most recent midterm election, the Democrat only won election as governor of New York by 6 points. And polling data, number 2 on our list there, shows it right now at being somewhere between a 6 to 12 point state. Huh. Would you, if you're the Republicans, take a run at New York knowing that that's a big state, 28 electoral votes, and if you win it, the Democrats can't win? You might. You might just do that. But that's because polling data is a second critical target. Look, I think there's a saying. Something doesn't happen until it happens. In other words, you can say, oh, this never happens, but then it does. There's a first time for everything, or a first time in a long time for everything. Democrats weren't supposed to win Indiana and North Carolina in 2008, and they weren't even supposed to be competitive states. They hadn't been competitive states, and then they were. For reasons we don't need to get into here, mostly the fact that the primaries in Democratic primaries that year ran late, and President Obama, then Senator Obama, spent a lot of time both in North Carolina and Indiana, developed this very positive image that was not the way they associated Democrats. So when it came time for the fall election, they remembered the guy they saw in May that they liked a lot, and that made the states closer, and the Republicans were too late to realize the danger, so the Democrats won those 2 states. Likewise, in 2016, Republicans won Michigan for the first time in 32 years. And all of a sudden, it's a close state. It had not been that close a state in 2012, 2008, 2004, 2000. What changed? Well, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but the basic answer to that is the most Democratic part of the state is losing population. Detroit. A city that had, 900,000 people 50 years ago that may have 600,000 now. It's in the midst of an economic depression, as many large former industrial cities are. St. Louis is very similar. Cleveland is very similar, and they're losing population. So when you take the most Democratic part of the state and you shrink it, all of a sudden it becomes competitive. So you poll. You poll frequently. In fact, one of the great scandals of the whole Biden dropping out episode was he was not given fresh polling data for 2 months, which I have to tell you, for someone who has done polling, not me personally, but talked to someone who's done polling for a presidential campaign, that is so unbelievably unusual. Presidential campaigns will poll every state every few weeks, just to make sure they are where they say they are. The really competitive ones, they will be polling daily. And Biden had not been shown polls for 2 months. In fact, the story goes that the reason he finally announced he was going to exit the race was because he finally got his hands on polling data that showed he was not doing well. And the prospects of him doing better were marginal at best. So polling data matters. We're looking at, well, who are you going to target in this election? Maybe you don't target Florida the way you usually do. Florida, by far, the most spent on, attended on, doted on state in the union from 2000 to 2016. Now, take that back. 2000 to 2020. Probably won't get that attention this year. Why? Because in the last few elections, it's just drifted, not a lot, but it's drifted to the Republicans. So the question becomes, what polling data does is polling data gives you a sense of proportion and probability. So if you are the Republicans and you have a 30% chance of winning New York, and it might make it worth it to you. Likewise, going the other direction, if you are the Democrats and Florida's been 50-50 the last 6 elections, but this election your chance of winning it's down to 20%, do you put as many resources in it to hope to get it to that 50%? You might decide, we're going to have to build our coalition elsewhere. Which brings us to our final criteria, which is electoral votes. If I win Texas, that is 30, no, it's not up to 40. 40 electoral votes. Okay? 40. If I win California, it's 54. But like we said, California is pretty well ordained to the Democrats. But if I'm a Democrat, going back to that option, if I am a Democrat, my chances of winning Florida have dipped from 50 to 25%. Do I contest Florida? Going the wrong direction, for one thing. And for another, it's a 1 out of 4 shot. But, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but bear with me. If my chances of winning Texas go from 5 to 25%, do I put resources in? And you might think, because you're logical humans, well, no. Why would you? If you have a 25% chance of winning Florida and you're not going to put a bunch of resources in, why would you do it for Texas? 2 reasons. First reason is 10 more electoral votes. It's 40 to 30. Second reason, the drift is going your direction. That's what polling data and past election performance tells us. If I'm a Democrat, I'm more optimistic, even though we won Ohio and Iowa in 2012 and did not win North Carolina, I'm way more optimistic about my chances in North Carolina than I'm in Iowa or Ohio, because Iowa and Ohio are going the wrong direction for Democrats, and North Carolina is going the right directions, where we used to lose by 8, 10, 12 points. Now we lose by 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we win from time to time. The governor of North Carolina is a Democrat. Meanwhile, in Ohio, it's been a long time. They win with Sherrod Brown, who's, kind of a legacy there and kind of a legend there. But beyond that, when was the last time a Democrat won a statewide election in Ohio? It's been a hot minute. 2010, I think it was. Might have been 2006. And they haven't won a presidential election there since 2012. So, same thing in Iowa. It's been a while since Iowa's had, for example, a Democratic governor or a senator. So when you look at it from that perspective, you start to sit there and go, okay, well, at the end of the day, it sure seems like those states are drifting away from us. Plus, in the case of Iowa, the electoral votes aren't that high. It's only 6. So you start to create this map of, okay, here are the states that matter, here are the states that don't, for one of these 3 reasons. So maybe you put some money in Texas, because even though the polling data shows that the Republicans have a decent lead, and you haven't won the state in 50 years, man, 40 electoral votes is hard to look past. Likewise, you might look at Nevada. Now, Nevada didn't have a whole lot of electoral votes, but the first 2 criteria show that it could be anybody's electoral votes. And in a close election, 6 electoral votes could certainly matter. All Al Gore had to do to become president in 2000 was win 1 more state. Any state would have done it. Okay? Any state, New Hampshire, with its 4 electoral votes, could have done it. And that was a very close state. Obviously, Florida, which was where all the attention was, could have. So you look at these 3 criteria and you make kind of dynamic decision making about, okay, here's where we're going to put our attention. Now, why do we have to target? Let's close on that thought. The answer there is simpler than you might think, because everything in campaigns is finite. Yes, even though they raise gobs of money, there's not an unlimited amount of money. What's more, the main function of that is time. Okay? You only have so many hours in the day to campaign and make stops and do rallies and everything else. And so where are you going to put your candidate, is a real question. Because you can only, hypothetically speaking, at most you can do 2 rallies a day. You're probably not going to do that. You're probably going to do one. So are you going to put a rally in Oklahoma if you're a Republican, knowing full well that if you lose Oklahoma, you might get shut out in this election? You may not win a single damn state. Probably not. Even though the voters in Oklahoma love you and it'd be fun to go there, look at where these folks are traveling. Yesterday, I think it was, Kamala Harris was in Wisconsin. The same day or day before, Donald Trump was in Michigan. You've got to rally the troops where they are going to help you. So you're probably going to see a Kamala Harris rally in LA. I'd be surprised because she doesn't need LA County to win the election. She might do it somewhere in California because she's from California, kind of a homecoming thing. She might do that, I suppose. I was actually at her announcement speech in 2020, which was in Oakland, California. I was up in Oakland on a business trip at the time, and our building happened to be above the rally, so we checked it out, and she did very well there. Obviously, her campaign didn't go well in 2020, but that's how you make those determinations. Is you can only go so many places, you can only expend so many resources. You have to be judicious about how you do both. That's running for president. And that's it for today. We are not done with elections and campaigns yet. There's many more miles to go before we sleep on that subject. We still got to talk about things like campaign finance, which is a big issue. So we got a lot to go, but we're going to get there. Don't worry. Have a great day and take care of yourselves.